Greetings, chess fans. Today was a very exciting day here in Biel, Switzerland, where the 58th International Biel Chess Festival takes place. The main event of the festival is the GMT Grandmaster Triathlon, fought in two categories, Masters and Challengers. And today was the very first round of the classical tournament. There was a lot of exciting action, time scrambles, and also unusual positions. And as the game of the day, I have selected the longest but most interesting game that was played between Aram Jacobian with the white color against Makun with black. So the game opened up with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, the Italian game, bishop c5, d3, knight f6, a4. A pretty modern idea, but mainly the typical idea of the a4 move is to stop future knight a5 ideas, to keep the bishop on c4 alive, at the same time also fight for space advantage. d6 was played, short castle, and a5. The purpose of this move a5 is to be seen later, because sometimes white can play moves like c3 and queen b3, and then black doesn't have the move knight a5. On top of that, also, this move restricts black the possibility to play a5 himself, once again battling for the space advantage. So black did respond with a6, c3, bishop a7, bishop e3. Here black could have taken on e3 immediately, but he was not really feeling that. Just as he did play bishop a7, it's a good moment again to move with the bishop. So knight e7, this was the choice of the Chinese Grandmaster. Knight e2, knight g6, and bishop b3. So a couple of moves later here, Makun finally did decide to take on e3, and after f takes on e3, again there was nothing terribly wrong by playing bishop e6, but definitely white would be slightly pressing at the queen side because of the space advantage. So here, black decided to play rook e8 with the idea to play bishop e6, with a bishop e6 recapturing e6 with the rook, so that eventually he can push d5. After h3, bishop e6, rook f2, here Jacobian did not take on e6 just yet, and of course you need to watch out d5, there's going to be knight g5 ideas, and the bishop on e6 is under attack. So black played c6 first, and now after bishop takes on e6, rook takes on e6, white had the time to include queen b3, targeting the pawn on b7, and after queen c7, try to slow down black's idea to play d5. Here black played rook c8, a rather mysterious move. During the online commentary, we thought that it made sense more for black to play rook d8, potentially even queen d7, and play d5. And also in the postgame interview, Jacobian said he was pretty happy with this move because now he could play g4, and even though the engine fully like it from the white's perspective, any d5 ideas, black always needs to watch out for the g5 move, and the pawn on d5 is going to lose support. So here black played knight f8, rook f1, knight e7. These moves look perfectly reasonable, but at some point already here, Jacobian had decided to sacrifice the pawn on a5. So he played knight h4. As you can see, every single white's piece is looking towards the black king, and also the move g5 allows white to build up the initiative. So here black played h6, knight f3, and finally Makun decided he simply has to accept the pawn on a5, even though the engine marks this as a mistake. White proceeded with a kingside attack, g5, knight h7, g takes, and rook, first knight c5, of course, queen d1, and rook takes on h6. And in the postgame interview, Jacobian said that he knew Makun to be a very solid defender, so he was expecting a very tough game. And here he decided to play b4. So essentially his idea is to lure the queen further away from the defense. It does cost him the second pawn, but now after knight f5 here, white has all kinds of interesting ideas. For example, black could play rook f6, and it looks very tempting. Oh, here, I think it's knight e7, my apologies, but I think it was here. Rook g6, king h2, and for example, after either rook c7 or rook e8, you're already thinking about moves like knight takes on g7 at the right moment. So rook c7, knight h4, rook g5, and for example, even here, knight takes on g7 could be a move. It looks really crazy, but apparently it is working because, again, knight f5 is incoming, maybe rook g2 or queen f3. As you can see, this queen on b4 is pretty far disconnected from the game. So in the game, it didn't happen. Jacobian played the human move knight x on d6, targeting the pawn here, and here the Chinese Grandmaster made a mistake. He played f6. Now f6 seems to be like the safe move, but it also disconnects the rook on g5 from the game. He should have played an knight f6, but again, humanly it looks pretty scary because you can easily see that white could sacrifice the exchange at f6, take it here and look for some 98 ideas. The rook on c7 is under attack. There's a check on f6. Knight f5 is incoming. So it's really, really difficult for black to go for this continuation. f6 was played, and here Jacobian was very quickly improving the strength of his position. So he played knight f5, queen b3. He traded the queens, and after h4, even though the engine marks this as a miss, unfortunately for black, the rook on g6 now is pretty badly positioned. So rook b1 was played, d4, also a very strong move, and as now we have a position where white is down a pawn, but with a simply dominating position, and the rook on g6 is disconnected from the game. Knight a6 was played, rook b7, enabling knight e7 fork ideas, and here black decided to take it and sacrifice the exchange. So later after the game, Jacobian said this was a difficult decision for him because he could not decide which is better, accept exchange on g6 or take on d4, play for dynamics, but he felt he made the right choice. He played e takes on d4, rook g4, and now he had two strong connected passed pawns in the center. Captures on d5, e takes on d5, and knight c7. Even though we have a material balance on the board, white should be winning because two strong connected passed pawns. Here, Jacobian played d6, and after the game, in the post-game interview, he said he was pretty happy with the move, but we thought that rook c2 was probably the cleaner move, not allowing black to sacrifice the minor piece for the two pawns. So still after d6, rook takes on c4, this was winning, and Jacobian was very critical of himself after the game. He said he should just take on c7 and win this game, but after rook takes on c7, the position still requires a lot of accuracy because white is down basically to the last pawn on h4, and if this is traded, there might be theoretically drawn positions. So we thought that here, after rook takes on c4, the more accurate move was d7. The pawn on d7 is simply a stronger pawn than the knight, and after knight e6 here, white is winning with knight e6, give a check, give another check, and a very powerful move, rook e2. The point is, even though black does give up the piece for the two pawns, because of the knight on h7, black is lost. So black gonna play knight f8, white simply takes it, and there would be a mate on the board. A pretty difficult sequence to find, so that's why here again the move 40 was probably the cleaner way to win, rook c2, but even though according to an engine d6 is winning. So what happened in the game, here Jacobian played rook e2, and what he missed is that after the trade and knight d6, he thought he's winning, but he had simply missed knight g6, that suddenly black is activating his pieces. Couple of moves later here, white did win the pawn on a6, but now the position started to look like something where black might have pretty good drawing chances. All he needs to do to trade either the knights or maybe the rooks, eliminate the pawn on h4, and claim a theoretical draw. So this is what Makun was trying to do. Obviously, Jacobian was avoiding the piece trades. Rook d7 was a very human move, threatening knight takes on h4 or knight e7, and now the critical moment arose here. After rook d5 here, Jacobian realized that he cannot leave the pawn on h4 alive because after knight takes on g7, there's knight h4, king g7, leaving theoretical draw. So he realized that he needs to keep the two knights and the rook on the board at all costs, even if the pawn on h4 has to disappear. So he took on g7, knight h4, and played knight e8. And in the interview, he said he was not really sure if this is winning at any given moment. He was just trying to play the moves and see where it leads him. Also, Makun was getting really low on time, and this definitely helped white. So black played rook d1, knight f4, knight f3 check, king g3, and now came the critical mistake. Black played knight e4, a rather unfortunate placement for the knight. Apparently, the knight on e5 was standing better. And where's the problem? Suddenly after knight f6 and knight h5, the king doesn't really have a safe place to go. So king h7 was still the better try. Makun unfortunately played for him king f8, and now suddenly after rook a7, he's getting all kinds of mating patterns here. So he tried to escape to the queen side. Knight e5 was a powerful find here by Jacobian, who would later in the interview confess he already felt that it's winning because of a checkmate threat, and it's a rather unusual position, but white has a lot of tricks. Black played knight f5 check, and here again Jacobin was pretty critical of himself. He said he should have played king g4. This is also what we spotted during the commentary, that the knight is simply dropping, basically forcing black to resign. But Jacobian simply had thought there might be some stalemate ideas, which are obviously not there because the king always escapes to c8. So knight h6, king g5, the knight is dropping because there's no check on f7. So what happened here is he did play king f4, now to rook f1, king e5, king c8. He spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out where's the victory. And we're also trying to use the table base, and we could not really figure out during the live commentary because the engine was saying that there's like 6 ways to win, but none were really definite. In the end, Jacobian did manage to find a way to rearrange the pieces. Rook f7, threatening again checkmate on f8. Black played king c8. We thought during the commentary that knight e4 made really sense, threatened to play knight f4, knight e6, and knight e6. But Jacobian played something else. He played rook c7 and rook h7, once again threatening with a mate. And here he played knight e4 and knight c5, once again threatening with a mate. After king e8, the clean move was knight e6. The king is getting in a checkmate. Patterns here, knight c7 or knight f6 is a mate. So finally here after rook e1 check, king f6, black had to resign because there's 2 kinds of checkmates incoming, and rook takes on e6 gives black nothing. Actually, it was entirely possible to play king takes on e5 as well, and during the commentary I thought if this would happen, like this would be really ridiculous, to be honest, even though there's all kinds of ways for black to give checks, but it still apparently wins. Rook e5 check, you cannot take it, but king f6, rook f5, king g6. Here the black rook is running out of checks. Rook g5 is knight g5, rook f6 is knight f6, and also rook takes on d5 is simply a fork on c7. But none of this happened, of course. King f6 is very clean, and Jacobian won a very nice game. So after the first round of the classical tournament, here are the current standings combined with the rapid tournament. Once again, the rapid tournament would give every single player 2 points for the victory, 1 point for a draw. In classical, victory is awarded 4 points and the draw is 1.5 points. In the Masters section, Fedoseev shares the lead with Aravind. They played a draw against each other, and then Wojtaszek is 1 point behind, 7.5 points, having drawn his own game against Frederick Spane, and Voldar Murzin missed a really great winning chance against Salem Saleh. In the meantime, in the challengers, 2 of the leaders of the tournament, Nicolas Theodorou, they scored the victories together with Aram Jacobian. Nicolas beat Rinat Jumabayev after the Kazakhstani player misplayed the opening. Jacobian's game we just saw, and also David Navarra was able to score a rather impressive victory from the defender's side against Daniel Darda with the black color. The action is going to continue tomorrow at the usual time, 2 p.m. Central European Summer Time here in Biel with round 2 of the classical portion. So if you want to see the action live, please tune in at 2 p.m. and watch it live from Biel in Switzerland. Stay tuned.